Hello and good morning, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the Educational Collaborative of International Schools, established for 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. My name is Georgie McIntyre and it's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. ECIS are proud to be members of the International Schools Recovery Forum alongside Together Schools and Clear Path Alerts. Kevin Lloyd will be joining you today from Together Schools. These series of free webinars are offered as part of this collaborative forum to support our international schools with advice and guidance as they reopen and recover. We will be sharing a recording of today's webinar and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions via the chat box. As schools reopen with constraints from COVID-19, including social and space distancing, schools are reacting. There is a need to provide blended learning options for the students to support their learning criteria. This session will provide options on how to manage this and considerations for schools when providing blended learning. Please let me introduce our experts. Matt Harris is an international educational consultant based in Singapore. In his work, Dr. Harris helps schools, districts and educational technology companies with educational technology strategic planning, system design, training and programme development. Kevin Lloyd joins us also today from Together Schools and will be managing and discussions with Matt. It is my pleasure in joining and welcoming and handing over to Matt and Kevin for today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Georgie. So let's jump right into this because I know that a lot of people are kind of eager to talk about this very very important subject right now. I'll give you a little bit of background on who I am. This is Matt Harris. And what we're hoping to do here is to have about a 15 to 20 minute presentation, and then we will go into a bit of discussion around kind of the key items that we're discovering in schools as we contact schools around the world, and then open this up for questions for you. Now, as we go along with this webinar, we really don't want it to be something that we're just kind of presenting to you as attendees. So Zoom has a couple of nice features, and if you've been reading the news, a couple of not nice features, but with the nice ones, you have the ability to ask questions either through the chat or there's a Q&A section, I believe we may have turned on. Luckily, we have a lot of us running this webinar right now. So if you have any questions, whether it's a clarification on something we've said, or you want to ask a detailed question or something contextualized specific to where you are, please ask it. We're happy to interrupt whoever's speaking to answer those questions live on air. And nicely, we have enough people here where as I'm presenting, others can review the questions and jump right in with them. So please, I encourage you very heavily to ask questions and participate as we go along. The other benefit that we have here is that I am in a different location than many of you. I'm in Singapore, and Singapore is having a much different experience with COVID-19 than other parts of the world. And as of today, actually, my two children, who are ages 6 and 8, went to school for the first time in 20 years. So I've had the opportunity to help school kind of understand what it was doing with remote learning, and then kind of watch them as they've done a really nice job of preparing for the re-entry of students before the end of the academic year. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned that hopefully will help all of you as we go forward. Okay? All right. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. As Georgie mentioned, I'm an international educational technology consultant based in Singapore. I've worked for a number of international schools, and in my current work as a consultant, I help schools, ministries of education, large school districts, individual teachers, anything related to technology and learning, which is quite helpful as we start talking about the transition away from purely online learning to more face-to-face, and I'm going to put air quotes around the word normal learning back in the classroom. So a lot of my experience over the last 2 to 3 months has been helping organizations do the best with online learning and help out as they move forward back to starting to figure out how to move in this recovery period as Kevin has set up for us. So that's really where my background is. I used to be chair of the board for the International Society for Technology and Education, and I'm currently the founder of ChildSafeguarding.com, which is an online platform for support staff. So a lot of the e-learning things we're going to talk about, I've put into place with this particular endeavor. You'll notice on the bottom of the screen that I have contact information. If you have any questions during or after this, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help schools around the world, give you some advice or point you to some resources, always looking to help people as they move forward. Okay, so this is the agenda that we've prepared for today. We're going to talk about a little bit about preparing to go back to school. Then we will talk about some factors to consider as you're looking at going back to school and taking these best approaches. We will specifically talk about what many of you are going to have to do, and that is this notion of blended learning. And I'll give you some definitions. We'll talk about kind of the pros and cons and the challenges that you'll run into moving away from a purely online environment. And then we're going to talk about flipped learning specifically, because it's a great tool that will allow you to maximize a lot of the time as you start moving forward. And then we'll do some Q&A. So please have those questions ready. If there's something specific to where you are, wherever it is in the world or within your job position, please have those ready and we'll be ready to answer them. Okay, so as you're preparing to reopen, and some of you may be reopening in the next couple weeks, couple days, maybe a couple hours, I don't know. Some of you may not even be looking at reopening or readmitting students until August. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you could be looking in the next 2 months. The schedule is different everywhere based on geography, based on level of threat, government factors, all of this. Every place is different. So what we're going to talk about is some of those items that you should consider as you actually talk about reopening. And the way that I would recommend to you to reopen and kind of do this continued academics is to take this approach like you're landing an airplane, right? We don't immediately, okay, I've made a mistake here. I shouldn't have done this. I realize that we all have an issue here because it's been so long. Many of you probably don't remember. This thing is called an airplane, okay? So this is an object you used to go in a few months ago where you'd actually fly in the air. It was magic. Take you from place to place and then you'd land. Luckily, I have actually talked to some people about what air travel is going to look like in the future, and they tell me it's going to look like that. So just be ready. It's going to be a little backwards. But anyway, let's get back to the point. So as you're looking at doing this, it's very important that as you're about to reopen, you look at doing this in a well-controlled, simple manner. Don't immediately open your doors. You can't do that. And a lot of the schools that have started to reopen in Asia, be they in Singapore or China, Vietnam has been reopening. What they do is they have to account for factors to allow for the school to keep everybody safe, but then also being able to meet the needs of the students. So what are those key variables in order to kind of facilitate this soft landing? So first off, the very first thing that you always need to consider is the age of the students. So what we're doing here in Singapore is that the younger students get preference towards on-site activity as opposed to the students that are older in the older grades. And this is actually government mandated. So what they've said here is only 50% of the students are allowed on campus at any time. And what that means is the younger students, the ones in the kind of the kindergarten and the preschool ages, are there all the time. And then the older students don't come in at all for the end of the school year. We've got about 3 weeks left. But there are needs associated with your students in terms of the ability to do online learning and to connect with others. That has to be a factor that you talk about very specifically. I have seen the most successful groups talking about these in terms of cohorts, groups of schools. If you're coming from the British system, kind of key stages, looking at the various key stages, and doing an analysis of need based on those elements. That's absolutely key. The next is kind of tying that into the ability to work remotely from a student perspective. Now, you'll be very, very clear about which students can and cannot work remotely. A lot of that can be tied to age, but then there are also other factors, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So having some way of understanding which of these students is going to be okay to continue with online learning or to spend more time on online learning is a very important factor that I consider you providing some sort of rating system for your students to understand that. Another piece, and this is a rather large one, is teacher considerations. Now, we are working with ECIS, and my kids go to an international school, and we know the realities of teachers, especially at this time of year if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, and that is that some teachers are leaving, and we've done our recruitment. Are those teachers going to be able to show up? Do we have the finances to pay that many teachers? Will we have continued numbers? In our area of the world, because there are some non-first world countries here, a number of people have gone back to their host countries. Are those people even going to be able to come back? Are they going to have to wait 2 weeks? Are they going to be able to get a flight? Who knows? So having a real clear understanding of what your teaching capabilities are, as well as your student capabilities, is going to be absolutely critical for you. Next, one of the things that we've been seeing a lot, and I've been working with schools on, is what do we do for specialist learning or practical learning? So specialists in the younger years, like your PE and your music and your art, those are items that create more safety concerns. And actually, my children's schools decided they're only going to do it in the classroom, and the specialist may or may not come in if it's safe. Well, that doesn't always work for the exam years and the older students who are doing practical learning and need to do art projects and science work and all of that. How are you going to get that sort of learning accounted for within your new plan? So it's really interesting because the normal classroom kind of core subject areas tend not to need a lot of finessing, but the practicals and the electives and the specialist ones tend to get a lot of our time. One thing you will need to consider quite a bit is physical and environmental safety. And depending on what country you're in, you're going to have a lot of regulations or almost none at all. I would talk to your peers about this because there are varying levels of reaction and regulation and things that can be considered best practice for this, keeping students apart or eating in classrooms or isolating stairways, all of that, definitely things to think about. Further staffing on campus. One of the challenges I've seen in a lot of schools is that they say we're going to put in all of these new regulations for student movement and student congregation, but then they tell you that all of the non-essential support personnel are sent home. Well, how can you keep students where they're supposed to be if you don't have more bodies? So think about the staffing you're going to need for the constant cleaning and all of those other items and the monitoring. There is a staffing component of that. How are you going to do this? How are you going to make sure it's up to code? How are you going to keep records of those things? That's critical. And then this is a one that I talk to, and it's different by school, but every school has what we consider special populations. And what I mean by this are ones that don't fit the norm. How are you going to handle them? And this can be quite varied. So in speaking with people in the United States, we're worried about special education students. So how do you get an autistic student to wear a mask all day? Not going to happen. What do you do with physically challenged students? What do you do with EAL students? What do you do with exam year students? Because they have to have a certain number of hours, and this is the prime time for our grade 11 students or year 12, depending on what kind of curriculum you're running. How do you handle those special populations to ensure everybody has access? So that list of factors is something I would definitely consider as you're going forward. And then, of course, sustainable learning, right? We need to have a way of giving appropriate feedback, making sure that we're continuing to interact with students. This is a very big thing to do going forward. Okay, invariably, this is going to lead you towards blended learning. This notion of spending a certain amount of time live in the classroom and some amount online. So you've done all remote learning. Prior to that, you pretty much did all live learning. Now you're going to have some combination, and blended learning is going to be a reality for your lives. So I'm just going to put these definitions up here. If you don't have time to go through them now, that's fine. We will give a handout at the end, and we're recording this so that you'll have access to it later. But the idea with blended is that the term itself is kind of like the term leadership. We know it when we see it, but we can't really describe it. Blended learning comes in so many forms and fashions. The only thing that we know about blended learning, or that we can say specifically, is that it's a combination of online or digital media with traditional classroom face-to-face connections. That's it. So this provides you some huge opportunity to kind of break the mold and try various things out based on those factors and needs of the students that we talked about before. So here's what blended learning is and is not. So it is a combination of in-person and online learning. Full stop. It is an opportunity to actually open up your space and time. Yes, you can open up physical geography using blended learning. We'll talk about that in a minute. It is organized by models of practice, and there's a planning link later on the end that you can use to do some good planning. And it's not going away. So that's another element that we're seeing quite a bit as we're doing this transition, is the expectation of continued remote learning in some respect is going to happen from what we're hearing, that remote learning is not going to go away. So the embracing of blended learning now in preparation for reopening is actually preparation for a very long period going forward. What it is not It's not clearly defined in how much time you should spend online or in person. There's so many factors here, and you know them already, that just saying that we're going to do 2 days on, 2 days off may not be enough. You may need to have a little bit more look into your percentages. It's not easily managed given the current COVID circumstances. The way to manage proper learning is going to be a bit of a case-by-case, teacher-by-teacher, subject-by-subject basis, and it's not for everybody. There are certain students in your school, regardless of age, that are not going to be able to handle the complexity of remote learning on week A and not remote learning on week B. So have some pieces in place to help support those special students that just aren't really suited for blended learning. Okay. The notion of blended learning provides us a lot of opportunities that you can take to go beyond what you're doing normally in your classroom. And the piece that I'm going to hit most, which is the most valuable for us, is this notion of space and time. That blended learning provides us the opportunity to go beyond the classroom and go beyond the time schedule, beyond even what you're doing with remote learning. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But there are a couple things that you need to recognize as you move from this purely online environment to this blended environment, which you're all going to have to do. You need to look at how you're teaching, not what you teach. That the process is going to be even more important, important than the content and everything you've done at this point. The process of interaction is paramount. The connection with students and maintaining those relationships is absolutely key. So as you're looking at your transition plans, you're going to focus a lot on what needs to be done from a logistical perspective or an organizational perspective, but the relational one is absolutely key. Obviously, you've done a number of these things with the technology already. If you're doing remote learning, your teachers have probably taken some new roles and are managing progress in different ways. That is going to further evolve. And you need to make a big push towards the interactive. You know, the students are most interested in going back to school because of the people. You know, I mean, I doubt they're there to eat the canteen lunch or to drink out of the water fountains, which they can't do. They want the people, which means there has to be interactivity with others and with the teachers themselves. So again, that relational element is the largest piece that's most important. Okay. Okay, so where are the opportunities for learning? The opportunities learning come in this particular space. So what we're used to when we're prior to COVID-19, as we call it, pre-COVID-19, we're used to the students kind of living in this space. And what I do is I've got a time side here, and I've got a place side here within my table here. So in this particular one, students are generally in the same place at the same time. A normal classroom, Tuesdays, period 3 is biology. Okay, so we're used to that. We got forced into this one. Different time, different place. Remote learning rarely occurred at the same time or consistently. There might have been some meetings, but for the most part, everybody's on their own, and we do this asynchronous online approach, right? And what you're going to have to do as you look into this blended learning piece is that you're going to have to do a combination of both of those, but it provides you some opportunities actually, which is really interesting. And that's where these other two boxes come in. It is possible to do asynchronous learning in the same place. And this sort of approach will provide opportunity for greater safety and greater social distancing within the schools. So you can separate the students and have them go online to do some of their online work as they've been doing with the remote learning in the same room. So you could do some of the similar activities, but now they still have the opportunity for some level of interaction, but they can do it at their own pace. The other thing you can do is you can schedule more specific times for the remote learning. So instead of giving them this kind of complete freedom and only having meetings, you can go in a different direction and schedule them specifically to have those interactions and foster those relationships that are so critical. So you can live in all four of these areas with a good blended model. And let's talk about that a little bit. I'm actually going to skip this one and talk specifically about flipped learning. A lot of you have been exposed to flipped learning before, but what I've been doing with schools is talking about flipped learning for the COVID age. because you can use this definitely to your advantage to best maximize your student contact time and your non-student contact time, and to really take that relational focus of reopening your schools. So for those of you that aren't aware, the notion of flipped learning is this. In a traditional classroom setting, prior to the world flipping upside down, we would do this. Students would sit in a classroom and have some sort of content exercise with the teacher, right? They would listen to a lecture, they would do some sort of interaction. There was a lot of consumption of knowledge in this particular space. And then they would go home and do some sort of homework or some sort of interaction with the content. But when they're together, they're really getting a direct, a one-to-one, they're not getting a real connection with the teacher, they're getting more of a connection with the content. And then at the point where they could use some sort of guide, they're being stuck on a computer or doing homework on their own. So this notion of a flipped classroom is actually to flip that on its head, where students record, or where teachers record those videos so that the students are engaging in those materials on their own. And then when they come into school, they're doing the homework, quote unquote, with the teacher there. So while they're doing the homework and they're actually interacting with the content, they have the opportunity to ask questions directly of the teacher. They get to work in pairs. They've got a much more affective or emotional experience with the content. Now, we can do this kind of souped up, turbocharged for COVID-19, because your teachers are used to making these videos. I see them all the time, and generally they're pretty good. But now that the students are coming back in, why would you do lecturing? Why would you do those instructional activities? Use this point where they're coming back in to focus very clearly on the relational development so that they can get deeper into the content, personalize the content, and not feel like they're wasting their time sitting in a classroom just going over the same materials that they could have possibly gotten at home, right? So again, you can really make a big push for those one-to-one connections or the connections with the teacher by doing this flipped model. That also provides us an opportunity to take the remote learning and schedule these sorts of interactions between students by asking them to do the remote video connection stuff at other times. So very much I would take a look at not only doing the blended work, but really take a deep look at how you can support your teachers in doing this flip model. And one element I will say with this is that the most effective videos are ones that are short, pointed and short. Some schools or some teachers will create a presentation or a PowerPoint or something and then do that with some discussion and interaction for 3 to 5 minutes. That's really the best approach, because then it's pointed and then you give them some activity. So you tell them, spend 10 to 15 minutes going through the materials and then come prepared to discuss your literacy or your math or whatever it is in this group setting. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm not gonna go through this planning material. There is a link there. I'll leave it up here for about 10 to 15 seconds. If you want to take a screenshot, you can have it. There's some blended learning planning stuff there that you can use. Again, this will be available to everybody afterwards. And that's pretty much the extent of the presentation. What we'd like to do at this point is open up the webinar to questions and discussions and bring people on to get information specific to their context. So Kevin, have we received any questions along the way?
Georgia, you've been following, I think, the questions and stuff in the chat. Did you see anything yet from the audience?
No, there hasn't been anything as yet, but please feel free, everybody, to ask sort of questions and experiences. Does this work for all sort of class sizes, Matt, or have you sort of seen experiences where it can be offered out to a larger group than sort of a standard classroom size?
I've seen it for both. I think that the larger classroom sizes make this a bit more difficult, and so where I've seen success in doing the flipped blended learning with those larger classes is to create differentiated groups. And for those of you that are familiar with differentiation, what differentiation does is that each group, the groups are created within the greater whole based on some sort of characteristic. It doesn't always have to be ability level. It sometimes can, but Sometimes we do it based on interest or availability, or even some relational elements of friends groups or something like that. And then having specific times for those groups to meet within the school day that are kind of pre-planned. Those I seem to be the best. And kind of the aim is keep the groups between 5 and 10 at most, is what I've been finding quite frequently. Yeah. Oh, I see questions are coming in. This is wonderful.
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the first questions was about advice for early years teachers, and I see a similar question about the working with younger students, like 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
What can we consider there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm speaking of this from what I've been hearing from schools in the region, and from my own personal experience of working with a 6-year-old. Who now has also come back from his first day of school and is so tired from interacting with others that he's taking a nap. You know, the challenge here with doing this flip sort of learning is that the activities have to be low. I mean, you know this with the remote learning piece, that the activities have to be something that are either low cost in terms of time or supervision, or need to be done in an environment where the children can interact with something in their own environment. I would argue that the same thing needs to happen within this blended environment, where we need to do those things at home and then focus very much on the tactile and the interactive when they do come into school. The other piece, as I said at the beginning, is if you have influence over your particular school, is that the early year students need to take precedence over all the other ones of actually coming into the school, because they take the most time from parents that are trying to work at home. They can do the best by doing the social interactions and the social emotional learning, and that's where they need to get the most. Now, what we can do is create smaller affinity groups for them if you are required to continue to do the remote learning. Although with the EY kids that I've seen, I would think that 6 is about the max I would put them in an affinity group. And the time also needs to be much shorter. So keeping them into a 5 to 10 minute meeting. And again, making it low stakes. If somebody doesn't show up or isn't prepared or is screwing around or whatever it is, like, that's life. Let's just get them getting that emotional experience and the tactile experience even in their own home. Those are the key elements. If you're looking for them to, learn the alphabet and have great addition facts by June, I don't think that that's a realistic expectation. That said, one other thing that I will say to everybody along this path is that from an academic perspective, not necessarily for a prepping perspective, we have a very unique opportunity here in terms of assessment. And I haven't really seen schools take advantage of it. We can't give out grades the same way that we did before. Like, it's just, there's not enough material to do that. But we have an opportunity to provide more pointed and valuable feedback. And yet I'm hearing quite frequently from teachers, good job, some recognition of the work that the students had done, and I'd like to see a little bit more. Well, that's not really useful feedback. That's more of an acknowledgement that work had been done. I would suggest avoiding that. I would suggest challenging students, giving them something pointed, giving them something to work on specifically, rather than just the rah kind of, I see that you're doing it and I appreciate your effort. Really, really give the type of feedback you were hoping to give without giving a letter grade or a mark or some sort of rubric-based assessment. Yeah.
Okay, great, Matt. Thanks for that. Our next question was along the lines of specialist lessons and things like after-school activities and stuff like that. We know that the access to facilities is not there anymore, or certain equipment for music or whatever it may be, as well as after-school sports or other activities. What ideas might you have, Matt, for handling those while they're canceled right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of them. One of them that I have found most successful is, let me speak to success and non-success. I have seen when the specialist teachers try and engage in concept-heavy learning, that it's not as successful. Today, we're going to learn specifically how to kick this soccer ball, and I'm going to tell you why it's important. Or we're going to do this type of music theory, and here's how you're going to do it. I have found that those don't work out terribly well. What I found from an online perspective, that the online specialist lessons that seem to be the best are ones that are taught in a way that students are used to learning online. So if you go into YouTube and you watch, there are a million YouTube videos that are produced by influencers or various other people where they talk about, how to appropriately put on makeup, and they will do it as a step-by-step instruction that has some sort of tangible element to it. The kids will get engaged in it. So what I've seen from like a PE lesson is playing a game, having them pause the video as they're playing the game, and then they go on, and you're kind of encouraging that movement. Okay, go find a spoon from the kitchen, and now we're gonna flip the spoon 7 times and do these things. Doing an art lesson where you go through the art steps one by one as you would instead of instructing the students like a normal classroom setting, you do it as kind of a YouTube tutorial. I find that those are the most valuable. And then when they get into school, what we're finding is being entirely practical. So getting them on, moving around, no discussions, no new concepts, like get them playing music, get them doing specific art, get them on with it in as much of a group relational setting as possible. That's the best engagement that you're going to get, is my feeling. Now, the big challenge with this is the specialist lessons like languages. I have found them to be the hardest hit by this particular area. But I'm gonna revert back to that YouTube tutorial approach, because what ends up happening, and I did this when I was a university instructor, is I would record my lessons. And what I heard from my students was, yeah, the content was great, that was valuable, but hearing my voice, as atrocious as my voice is, being able to connect that familiar voice with the step-by-step instruction really makes it even better. So if they have their teacher creating a YouTube tutorial on how to play a silly game or how to, do your 30-minute workout, that goes a very, very long way.
Okay. Good. Let's see, more questions here. We've got some around the areas of science and stuff. So how can we use resources for science while teaching primary school students?
I recommend they blow up things in their own house. Wait, no, that's probably not right. Science is an interesting one. What we have done, or what I have seen, is that science has become quite difficult, as you're noting. What I have looked for is, or what I have seen most successful, are the practical elements rather than the conceptual elements. So doing some sort of life science experiment if they have access to grass and dirt in a park or something like that, or doing some basic physics or basic chemistry using household items. But the science piece for primary students needs to be as tactile and interactive as possible. So again, doing maybe like one of these sorts of YouTube videos and having them take pictures or take videos of themselves, doing the practical elements of it without high expectation that they're going to understand the conceptual elements of it along the way. So really getting them to get away from the screen and putting their hands on materials, almost like a design technology or something, or a maker sort of approach, seems to be the most effective for primary students. And then what you can do is you can almost do a follow-up video from there that that has, oh, thank you, a follow-up video that then translates that into some sort of concept that you're talking about. But I would err as much on the self-directed tactile learning for science in the primary years as possible. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. I can see here we've got a good comment from Tapas Winnie. Thank you, Matt. Our online learning has worked for early year students with full support from parents. Working parents access the recorded versions of the online lessons. We know this won't work without the parents, however. Her inhibitions are more about making social distancing work for younger students, with the whole point that they would come to school, but the social distancing is actually causing a bit of a defeating the purpose. Have you seen any good examples of how when the younger kids come into school, they can actually interact without, but keep sort of adhering to the social distancing rules?
I'm going to do an experiment. Let's do this, because as you can probably hear from the background, I've been joined by my daughter who just got home from school. Hey, Michaela. Michaela, that's you, you're Michaela. Can you come over here? I'm having a discussion with teachers and principals and all these people that are trying to help students like you go back to school. And today, what did you do?
Go back to school.
Oh, how exciting. Okay, so I don't know what our experience was like. This is going to be a learning activity for me. Tell everybody what's your name.
Michaela.
You got to get closer because they got to hear you on the screen here.
We
Okay?
can hear you, Michaela. It's good.
Oh, great. Okay, what grade are you in?
Grade 2.
Grade 2. How exciting.
Wow.
Yeah. So today was your first day back at school, and what they're asking is, how did you feel about being separated from your friends? Did you still get to interact with them and have fun and still stay safe? Okay, so how did that work? What did you do?
Well, when we were playing, we had to be 1 meter apart from our friend.
Whoa. Okay. So did you guys come up with games to play,
Yeah.
or did they give you games?
Well, our teacher had some games, and on online learning, we gave her some games. And one of the game that I thought might be perfect was air tag.
Air tag, what is that? How does that
Air
work?
tag.
So you're still playing tag, but instead of actually tagging the person, you can just say, I tagged you.
Oh, that's so you don't actually touch them.
Yeah, you don't actually have to touch them.
So so just to interject here, so her teacher, and I got another question for you. Her teacher was great about this because they did a bunch of prep work the week before and talking about what they missed and how they were going to handle the first meetings. And the teacher asked them to come up with suggestions and then kind of told us as parents later on that we've got a number of activities in pieces in place to keep them separate. My son came back an hour earlier because he's a couple grades below, and he said that they were put into pods. So they were put into groups inside the classroom, and then they rotated in groups. So he had 5 people per group moving around. Now, Michaela, how did you do group work or work with your friends in the classroom, not play around?
Well, we couldn't actually play. Well, we could play with our friends at break times and lunch times, but we had to still be 1 meter apart from our friend.
What about between when you had normal lessons, like if you had numeracy or you had UOS or PSE, what did you do in the classroom to still work with other people but not touch them?
Well, we could still collaborate together.
How did you do that?
Well, we could ask them questions or ask them how to spell this, how to spell that, because sometimes even though we can't touch them, we can still just pretend that we're going to actually do it.
Did you do anything where you were working on like the same paper, or did you share an
No,
iPad or anything?
We can't. Well, some of us who did not bring their iPads to school, because our teachers gave us our whiteboards and our iPads, and so some of them came with iPads, but mine didn't.
Okay.
So once I got to school, I told Miss Mollett, which was my teacher, that I do not have an iPad within the blue packet that you gave me.
Okay. So everybody, just to be clear, everybody had their own materials. There was no shared materials. Was there anything on the ground to keep you separated, to say, this is your seating area?
Yeah, but, well, Miss Mollett put red lines for where we had to stay on, because since we didn't have any spacing, because we didn't have any lines or any spacing that we could know how to measure 1 meter apart.
Excellent. Those are great responses, Boo. Thank you very much. You did a really good job of answering questions. Thank you.
Michaela, thank you. Michaela, this is Georgie. I live in the United Kingdom, and it's really, really lovely to hear that you've had a really good day back at school. One thing that I want to ask you is, did you have fun?
Yes.
Excellent. And do you feel like you've learned something today?
Ask that question one more time, Georgie.
Have you learned something today, Michaela?
Ooh.
Yes. today my PE teacher taught us unit of study.
Oh,
Wow.
And
it's all news to me.
and my normal teacher, Miss Smollett, she taught us because we're talking about how to make an airplane glide because we have the wings and they
Yeah.
need a glide.
That was great. Thanks for doing this, because this was totally out of nowhere to have her join us. Thanks. You were great.
Thank you, Michaela.
Great. So just a few items there. As you can tell, they've been doing some pre-planning, and as I spoke to their school and have been in contact with them, they had been preparing for this for months. They were preparing for going offline, and then they were preparing for going online. And if you haven't done that preparation, that's totally fine. But use your networks to ask what other people are doing. So if you're a few months away from this, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from these Asian schools that are going back to school. And those red lines that she was talking about mirror almost exactly the red lines we have out on the sidewalks and in the malls and all of these things. So it's the same kind of demarcations, the same kind of rules are duplicated in the classroom are going to be the most effective. Now with primary students, the other thing that they've done at Michaela's school is to ask the kids to wear masks all day, and then they actually gave them face shields. I don't know what's a requirement in your particular locale or context, but just be careful of too much of the PPE because it will inhibit the students' full interaction. It might actually cause some challenges for them. So just try and find things that are best. Have regular hand washings, follow good instruction or good practices, and be prepared, as her teacher was, for the interactive piece more than the content piece. So, yeah. Okay, what other questions can we answer? I can see somebody mentioned about PBL. That's great. Yeah, I agree. PBL is the way to go for science.
Matt, I've got one, which is, we've talked a lot about younger kids and things like that, but what about, the older kids right now who are facing, it's a very significant time for students in grade 11, or like you mentioned, maybe grade 12. So how do we make sure that these kids are getting the sufficient support as they're transitioning back, or maybe not even transitioning back, to get through what they need right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big issue that we've been having a discussion for quite a while, and I really don't want to disparage any exam organizations, so maybe I'll just disparage all of them. And I have found that their preparation for this has been a bit lax. So the decisions they've made about exam schedules or requirements or all of it hasn't been there. And so what I would suggest is that as you as schools are looking at supporting your students, you start with the younger students first, and then you do your exam year students. That could be grade 11 or year 12, depending on where you are. If they're doing GCSEs, that could also be year 10. But this is usually the most critical time for them. I mean, there's a lot of practical work that they have to do, usually in the latter half of year 1 of the exam process. So they're getting to a lot of challenges right now, and there is the worry about lost time. What I would do is come up with a process for some sort of IEP, individualized educational plan, which we normally use for primarily SEN students. But you can use the same model to help them identify what's their own personal needs are for their specific classes. I would also have them create some sort of timeline for the amount of interaction they're having with materials, because there are hour requirements. As you know, the IB specifically has contact hours. They may ask for evidence, we don't know. And then start building in a more formalized revision schedule within those exam classes. So we usually leave revision to the end, or review to the end of units, or even the end of a term, or in large part before the mock exams. I think it's incumbent to do more of a circular spiral model with those particular students, and getting the review and revision stuff on almost consistently and constantly, right? Repeat, work, repeat, right? Repetition is key, as they always told me. And you know what they tell me? They tell me that repetition is key. So that's going to be the biggest help for those students. Yeah, I think that's the key bit, is really coming to a functional, logical, measured approach for those specific students that are going to have requirements that we don't know if they're going to be altered in the next year. Yeah.
Okay, any thoughts or comments from the audience on that topic?
One thing from me again, Matt, sorry, you mentioned about the flip learning and having the students watch some study before they actually attend the lessons. Is there any limitations around that, or any challenges, or how do we actually go about ensuring that they are actually engaging with the learning before the lessons take place?
Right. Well, there's obviously no guarantee, and this is why we say that blended learning is not for everybody. There's a certain amount of motivation and locus of control that can be challenging, but there's also an opportunity for feedback there. Most learning management systems, and I think a lot of our schools are using formalized learning management systems, are able to measure engagement, their time on screen, you know, when did they click on things. So having those discussions, whether it's an individual feedback session or in a group session, saying, hey guys, I noticed that on average, you're only watching 2 minutes of my 7-minute video. Here's where we're gonna run into problems. That's key. Showing those sorts of data points are very helpful for the students. And then also looking for some other differentiated approaches within there. I mean, we talk about videos as kind of the primary easy way to do these things, but there may be other self-guided interactions or self-guided sites or other pieces that folks can do when they're kind of sick of videos. I know that I've seen a lot of video fatigue from students. My kids specifically, just to bring in a personal experience, you know, when they're on their 7th video of the morning, it's just, it loses a bit of an effect. So having those items, and then there's a delicate balance in the blame game, or in the real-time feedback for students if they're not prepared. Some students, obviously, and we all know this as teachers, some are going to benefit very well from kind of having the screws put on them. Other ones will not. So figuring out that balance is key, but I would hold them to account. I mean, it's like with anything. Show them the data, show them that you can see where their interactions are and their performance, and hold them to performance requirements that you've got. Yeah. And then if you need to have some individual connections with those students, I know that time can be quite difficult, and our teachers are very, very overworked at this point. So yeah, that can be a tough one.
Yeah, I guess, Matt, the attitude is that if the students that have looked at the learning are also sort of further forward in the lessons, that's going to give an element of encouragement to the others that haven't, because they feel there's the fear of missing out. So actually you hope that, you know, the other peers will sort of bring them along in the process as well.
Yeah, that's what I would hope. And yeah, that group support is also quite helpful, as you're mentioning. Yeah, I don't know if I would put too much focus on the other groups within their peers, like doing group activities that are having kind of common assessments among everybody can be a little difficult if you don't have that direct interaction with other people. So just err on the side of, just be careful with that
one.
Okay. We don't have any further questions at the moment, Matt, from the audience. Okay. Any other comments?
A few things that we've been noticing from schools that I just want to bring up. We spoke about it a little bit briefly in the presentation, but was this notion of physical security and physical distancing. If it's not a requirement at your schools, I might make it a requirement, and that is creating a single point of entry and exit into the school, to having some sort of clear procedure for entrance into rooms, having directional requirements on stairs and in passageways, and having them clearly marked. That seems to be the best thing. Singapore gets to be a little pedantic about these things, but there's tape all over the ground on this entire city. I think that the person that's profited the most is the guy that made red tape. But having those items in the schools are very valuable. Err on the side of over communicating with those. And then if you have any, how do I state this? I stated it a little bit in the earlier presentation, but one of my concerns is that a lot of support staff are considered non-essential and are being told not to come into work out of fear that they're going to bring the virus in. I am actually believe the opposite side of that. And I don't know if you have influence over your groups or if you can help with this, but those support staff that run the maintenance department or are doing things without direct student contact are wonderful ambassadors of your community. And it's a great point to have them be empowered to show that they are essential workers. By having all hands on deck, you have a better way of monitoring the students and ensure that social distancing measures are taken, that items that need to be cleaned are done in a timely fashion, and that there's a greater sense of safety, because having all of these restrictions in place and having a smaller group of humans puts immense pressure on teachers in the classroom, just in an unfair manner. So if you can get more of those staff to work and maybe reassign them during the school days while the students are around, it will create a better environment than if you leave them at home for fear of them bringing in the virus. So I would very much err on the side of more support than less support. The teachers, as they go back, I mean, the ones that I've been talking to who are back, it's quite stressful. They don't know what the new situation is going to look like. A lot of you have kind of said this in the questions, that we just have no idea. We don't know what day-to-day life is going to be like. Well, imagine having that with the worry about your own health and safety and the health and safety of the students. The more support that you can get from other people is going to be invaluable. This is a time for all hands on deck. So don't tell a bunch of the hands to go home, is my opinion.
Thank you, Matt. I think that's really, really important. It's about the familiar people, the lollipop lady, the dinner lady, all of that community that the students, particularly the younger ones, are used to seeing in there. And that, as you've mentioned, they are sort of people within a circle of trust. They're people that actually can help and assist with the sort of day-to-day running to ease the pressures on the teachers, as we're having to sort of manage in a much smaller group. So yeah, I think that's a really key point.
Because you also mentioned, Matt, about the fact that, you know, where you're at, some of the teachers may have gone home, they can't get back, they may have to be quarantined when they do come back and things like that. So I would guess that those extra resources may be the kinds of things you would think about to help if you have a teacher shortage, right?
Absolutely. And again, we don't know about these shortages. I mean, we have people coming onto this webinar from all over the world. If you were in the Philippines right now and you decided to reopen, none of your expat staff would be available for more than a month, because it's going to take them that long to find suitable transportation to get back, and they'll be quarantined before they get in the door, if they're even willing to come back. So how do you not draw upon the resources you already have to make that successful? So I would draw on who you got and put trust in the people that have been there as part of your community up to this point already.
Thank you, Matt. I think, is there anybody have any final questions that they'd like to ask before we draw the webinar to a close? Okay, I know we're all really, really busy, but I think I'd like to sort of personally thank Matt and Kevin today for providing us with insights and ideas around how we can actually interact and also blend the learning for our students. I think there's some really key points here, Matt, that we can take away and share. As mentioned, this has been recorded. It will be available on the International Schools Recovery Forum website. It will be available on ECIS website, and we will also send you all personally a copy of the recording today. We really do hope this has been an insightful sort of opportunity for you to take and think about how you can perhaps address your learnings. We are offering further webinars as part of this series, so please keep an eye out on the International Schools Recovery Forum for future webinars, and also ECIS webinar page. All of these are free, accessible to you and your colleagues. You know, we're just trying to help and support the community and international schools community as we work our way through this pandemic at the moment. And hopefully we can start to see a bit of light together in the community. So thank you. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
Matt, you just put up some extra additional information. Do you want to mention these?
If anybody would like any of the resources that I've provided, you can contact me. I will also give a copy of this presentation to Kevin, who can post it on the site for you, or even send it within the email that will be going out. Obviously, I'm at a different point in the timeline as a number of you, likely ahead of a number of you. So if there's questions that come up after this webinar that you need any help with, please reach out to me. I'm happy to share any insights that I have or experiences we have as life starts moving back towards daily school activities. This should not just be a one-off connection. So I'm open to continuing that conversation.
And if I could just add, in terms of the International School Recovery Forum, we put up the link there, which is the sep-forum.com. There we can actually continue this conversation. So if you have more questions or you want to share some insights or experiences that you have, please join the forum and add those questions or experiences there for everybody to see. So, and for that, I thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Kevin, also for your contribution.
Thank you, Georgie.
That's all right. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting, and we hope it's been useful. Please have a great evening, morning, day, wherever you are in the world, but we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.